12.2 Conduct Procurements. Conduct procurements is the process of obtaining seller responses, selecting a seller and awarding a contract. The key benefit of this process is that it selects a qualified seller and implements a legal agreement for delivery. The end result of the process are the established agreements, including formal contracts. This process is performed periodically throughout the project as needed, and that's from Pinbook Guide, page 482. We'll go straight into the Conduct Procurements inputs. This is a reasonably lengthy process. Input number 1, Project Management Plan. The Project Management Plan components would include Scope Management Plan. The scope to be performed by the sellers will be included in the scope statement for the project. A Requirements Management Plan describes how requirements will be analysed, documented and managed. In the previous lesson, Plan Procurement Management, I mentioned it in these meetings. You can also decide on a suitable method for managing and monitoring the procurement. This information can be recorded in the Requirements Management Plan along with how requirements are to be analysed and documented. Communications Management Plan. This describes how communications between buyers and sellers will be conducted. Generally, the communications between buyer and seller will be formal because of the legal nature of both procurement and contracts. Risk Management Plan for information on how risks in procurement are to be managed. Procurement Management Plan contains activities to be undertaken during the Conduct Procurements process. Configuration Management Plan defines those items that are configurable, those items that require formal change control, and the process for controlling changes in such items. It includes formats and processes for how sellers will provide configuration management in a way that is consistent with the buyer's approach. The cost baseline. It includes the budget for the procurement as well as costs associated with managing the procurement process and sellers. Input number 2, project documents, would include as always, the lessons learned register. There's also the project schedule because it identifies the start and end dates of project activities, including procurement activities. It also defines when contracted deliverables are due. Then there's the requirements documentation, which may include technical requirements the seller is required to satisfy and the requirements with contractual and legal implications. And as I've said several times before, these may include health, safety, security, performance, environment, insurance, intellectual property rights, equal employment opportunity, licenses, permits and other non-technical requirements. Now, it's important to remember lists like this for the examination in case they're asked. And if you're wondering how they can ask a list in a multiple choice examination, because the PMP exam is 200 multiple choice and each is 4 possible answers, quite simply they will give a list, they will give 4 lists similar to this or part of this list, and you've got to select the correct one from the 4 on choice. The risk register. Procurement has its own unique set of risks and each seller brings a set of risks of its own. Additionally, there's a growing trend to allocate individual risks on a contract to either the buyer or seller. Please note for the exam that a party cannot be held responsible for a risk over which they have no control, and a seller cannot remove all risks. Stakeholder register for details about the identified stakeholders who may be involved in the procurement process. Input number 3, the procurement documentation. This provides a written record used in reaching the legal agreement and may include other documents predating the current project. Procurement documentation can include bid documents such as a request for information, a request for procurement, request for a quote, etc. to enable sellers to develop a bid response. Procurement statements of work. This provides sellers with a clearly stated set of goals, requirements and outcomes from which they can provide a quantifiable response. Independent cost estimates. This is a reasonableness check against a proposal. Source selection criteria would describe how bidder proposals have been evaluated, including evaluation criteria and weights. For the exam, please note, for risk mitigation, the buyer might decide to sign agreements with more than one seller to mitigate damage caused by a single seller having problems that impact the overall project. The buyer might decide to sign agreements with more than one seller for small deliverables to assess them in action and later choose the best performing seller for major deliverables. Input number 4, seller proposals. When you send out the procurement documentation to a group of prospective sellers, hopefully a number will respond with a proposal. Here's a tip. If your organisation requires you to get more than 3 proposals, you have to send out more than 3 applications, a lot more. Some will respond for various reasons. At least one will try to get you to take a different product from the one you want. Software developers in particular do this. You send out a detailed requirement for a payroll system, and they'll respond that they have maybe an invoicing system that they claim will do 95% of what you want, and they agree to modify it for the remaining 5%. If someone offers you a deal like this, run away quickly. And of course, not everyone will address your selection criteria. For example, in one of my procurements, I sent out an 18-page detailed request, and I also attached a specially designed form for the responses, as well as completely specifying the required service. It also specified the font size, font color, the line spacing, page breaks, and so on that were required for those responses. One seller responded with a company's standard glossy colour brochure of their services and said that they hoped I could find a match. I couldn't find a match, or I would have burnt it on the spot, so I just dropped it into the litter bin instead. Sellers must address all the requirements in detail. In many ways, it's like applying for a job. In case you're wondering why I specified the font and font colour and size and page breaks and all that stuff, it's not because I've got some sort of issue. It's because if everyone follows all the rules and the proposals come in, you can lay them on a table side by side, they look the same, everything's in the same place, and it is much easier to compare them. It will really reduce your work. Is it asking too much of the sellers? No. The contract in this particular case was worth $4 million, so I'd expect them to jump through a few hoops. Input number 5, enterprise environmental factors. And the ones that can impact the procurement process would be the local laws and regulations regarding procurements, local laws and regulations ensuring that the major procurements involve local sellers, external economic environment, constraining procurement processes, marketplace conditions, information and relevant past experiences with sellers, both good and bad, prior agreements already in place, and contract management systems. On one point, I said the information on relevant past experience of sellers, both good and bad. Now, this was something that I learned very many years ago because I fell foul of it. I was working on a government procurement, and so we had a shortlist, I think, of 4 possible sellers, and as one of them was rated highly. When I saw that one, I recognized the seller because that seller had been a supplier to 2 contracts I'd worked in before out of government. And in each of those contracts, the seller had performed really badly. They'd been dishonest. They'd overcharged us. They were always late. There was always arguments. Everything was bad about that seller. So at this particular meeting, I brought up my previous experience, and I was immediately stopped, and I was told in government procurement you could not say anything about a seller unless you have solid documented evidence that this is the case. So They basically could not accept, they trusted me, but they were not permitted to accept my advice. And because this seller was the highest rating on paper, that seller got the contract, and that seller treated them exactly the same way that he had with the other companies that I've been involved with. So not every system works. Output number 6, organisational process assets. The assets that can influence the Conduct Procurements process include a list of preferred sellers that have been pre-qualified, organisational policies that influence the selection of a seller, specific organisational templates or guidelines that will determine the way agreements are drafted and built, and financial policies and procedures regarding invoices and payment processes. Conduct Procurements tools and techniques. Tools and techniques number 1, are you willing to guess this one? It's expert judgment. Well done. Expertise should be considered from individuals or groups with specialised knowledge or training in the following topics: proposal evaluation, technical and subject matter, relevant functional areas such as finance, engineering, design, development, supply chain management, etc. Industry regulations, environment, as laws, regulations and compliance requirements, and negotiation. Tools and technique number 2, advertising. You can place adverts online in appropriate forums as well as newspapers or trade publications, and most government agencies are required to advertise tenders and available contracts in public advertising or online. Tools and techniques number 3, bidder conferences, also called contractor conferences, vendor conferences and pre-bid conferences. These meetings between the buyer and prospective sellers prior to the proposal submittal. They are used to ensure that all prospective bidders have a clear and common understanding of the procurement and no bidder receives preferential treatment, which is very important, and it gives them the chance to get further clarifications on details, to sort out things which are ambiguous and so on. But, not meeting with people individually, that's the standard way it's done, but there is an exception to that. In a rare case where the bidder is in a different country and you can't use video conferencing for whatever reason, you can travel to them as long as the meeting is minuted and distributed to all parties. And in one or two that I've gone to, with the permission of the overseas bidder, they have allowed me to record on video the meeting, which was then circulated to all the other parties so everyone can see there's nothing hidden. But trap there is make sure you pay for your own travel, for your own hotel. Don't let them take you out for $300 meals or anything like that, or take you to a very expensive show. Anything like that can bring a claim of conflict of interest. You can lose your job over it. There could be a lot of bad stuff comes out of that. So always keep yourself squeaky clean when you're with other parties. But a hidden benefit of the bidder conference is that sellers will often generate a number of ideas for improving delivery, and you can use this advice on your project. Tools and techniques number 4, data analysis. The technique to use here is mainly proposal evaluation. Proposals are evaluated to ensure that they are complete and respond in full to the bid documents, procurement statement of work, source selection criteria, and any other documents that went out in the bid package. And that's why, as I said earlier, I design the forms for their response. I tell them the font color, everything, so that they all come back from all the sellers looking extremely similar. I can compare them and contrast them very quickly and easily. Tools and techniques number 5, interpersonal team skills. Many require negotiation skills for the Conduct Procurements process, and don't be afraid to call in the experts for this. This is an expert's arena, it really is. Negotiation is a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. A procurement negotiation clarifies the structure, rights and obligations of the parties and other terms of purchase so that mutual agreement can be reached prior to signing the contract. final document language reflects the agreements reached. Negotiation concludes with a signed contract, document or other formal agreement that can be executed by both buyer and seller. The negotiation should be led by a member of the procurement team that has the authority to sign contracts. And this is a huge negotiation trap, especially if you've not been involved in much negotiation. Now, I'll paint a scenario for you. Okay, you are the buyer. You have some work what you want, and you're willing to pay up to $500,000 for that contracted work. You meet with the seller's negotiator. Now, you're willing to pay up to $500,000, but you start with, say, $390,000 as your opening bid. Obviously, the negotiator will start to talk you up. Let's say after an hour, 2 hours of really intensive negotiation, the negotiator has got you up to $480,000. You're still quite happy. You've done a good job because it's $20,000 under your maximum. You've saved the organisation $20,000. There's bound to be a few "you well done" coming back from that. But now you start to discuss signing the contract, and guess what happens? The negotiator says, "I'm sorry, I'm not authorised to sign contracts." The negotiator leaves and the negotiator's boss comes into the room. And now the negotiator's boss is a much better negotiator than the previous negotiator, starts negotiating with you. But now, as far as the boss is concerned, your opening bid is $480,000. You have lost. Before negotiating, always confirm that the seller's negotiator is authorised to close the deal. Conduct Procurement's outputs. Output number 1 is selected sellers. The selected sellers are those who have been judged to be in a competitive range based on the outcome of the proposal or bid evaluation. Final approval of complex, high-value, high-risk procurements will generally require organisational senior management approval prior to the award. So, output number 2, agreements. Please note this for the exam. A contract is a mutually binding agreement that obligates the seller to provide the specified products, services or results, obligates the buyer to compensate the seller, and represents a legal relationship that is subject to remedy in the courts, and that comes up often in the examination. The major components in an agreement documentation will vary, but they may include procurement statement of work or major deliverables, schedule, milestones or date by which a schedule is required, performance reporting, pricing and payment terms, inspection, quality and acceptance criteria, warranty and future product support, incentives and penalties, insurance and performance bonds, subordinate subcontractor approvals. Not every contract will allow you to use subcontractors. Some will insist that you don't. Other contracts, they're happy for you to do it whatever way, but you need to have it clear what you're allowed to do. You can't assume. General terms and conditions, change request handling and termination clause, and alternative dispute resolution mechanism. Now the termination clause, that could be just you've reached the end of the contract, everything's done, everything's been handed over and signed off. What do you have to do to finalise? Or it could be everything's gone pear-shaped, that nobody likes what's been done, or it's behind, or they're trying to get more money, and huge disputes, and that's where the termination clause kicks in. So it needs to be a fair bit of work gone into that from both sides. Output number 3, change requests. Change requests to the project management plan, its subsidiary plan, and other components are processed for review and action through the Perform integrated change control process. Output number 4, project management plan updates. Any change to the project management plan goes through the organisation's change control process via a change request. If you get this wrong on the exam, you'll be kicking yourself for about a year, because I'm sure I've read that 100 times in this course. Components of the project management plan that may require a change request for the project management include requirements management plan. There may be changes to project requirements due to changes identified by sellers. Quality management plan. The sellers might offer alternative quality standards or alternative solutions that impact the quality approaches defined in the quality management plan. These can often be discovered in a bidders conference. Communications management plan to include the new seller. Risk management plan for risks associated with a new seller. Specific risks are incorporated into the risk register. The procurement management plan updates may be required depending on the results of the contracting and negotiating processes. Scope baseline. The project work breakdown structure and deliverables documented in the scope baseline are considered when performing procurement activities. The schedule baseline. If there are delivery changes created by sellers that impact overall project schedule performance, the baseline schedule may need to be updated and approved to reflect the current expectations. The cost baseline. Contractor and material prices can change. They can change frequently, in fact, during the delivery of the project, and these changes can occur because of fluctuating materials and labour prices caused by external economic environment and need to be incorporated into the cost baseline. Output number 5, project document updates would include lessons learned register as always. The requirements documentation. These may include technical requirements that the seller is required to specify and requirements with contractual and legal obligations. It may include health, safety, security, performance, environmental, insurance, intellectual property rights, equal employment opportunity, licenses, permits, and other non-technical requirements. Requirements traceability matrix. As sellers are incorporated into the project's plan, the requirements register and the traceability matrix may change depending on the capabilities of the specific seller. Resource calendars may need to be updated and probably will need to be updated depending on the availability of the seller's team. Risk register. Changes are made during the contracting process which reflect the specific risks of each seller. A stakeholder register. This document contains all the details about the identified stakeholders. The stakeholder register is updated as agreements are made with specific sellers. Output number 6, organizational process assets updates, would include listings of prospective and pre-qualified sellers, because you might remove a seller or you might add a seller, and information on relevant experience of sellers, both good and bad. As I said before, you need to have this documented if you're dealing with government, etc. That brings us to the end of Conduct Procurements. The next lesson is 12.3, Control Procurements. Please read the corresponding chapter in the PMBOK guide before watching the video.